Hey Richard, thank you so much for your time, man.
Thank you for having me.
We are big fans of you because of your work mainly on Coursera. However, our team here knows a lot about your books as well, especially Mindware.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Good.
Let me take here the questions. Before presenting ourselves, we would like that you present yourself. Tell us a little bit about what is your job, what you have done throughout your career, please.
Well, I was trained as a social psychologist, studying groups and attitudes, but I got very quickly onto people's reasoning because I would see the subjects in my laboratory making mistakes that were quite interesting. And so I ended up studying inference processes for the rest of my career.
Okay,
Excellent.
that's nice. We were discussing about your CV, and we we have thought about that you are like a psychologist, however, a mix with anthropologist as well.
Absolutely. You know,
Yeah.
in later years, I can't quite say I've become an anthropologist, but anthropologists would never accept me. Psychologists got serious about culture. I mean, Western psychologists for sure made the
Yeah.
assumption everybody was a Westerner. I mean, in fact, preferably an American.
Yeah.
And by accident, I started working with a Chinese student, really brilliant, who said one day, Dick, you and I think in completely different ways. And I said, oh, well, tell me. So he started telling me the differences. I didn't really believe him, but I said, they're testable. And everything he said was correct. I mean, we're basically Western, and by that I mean Northwestern European and British current and former colonies
Yeah.
are think in a very different way from the rest of the world. I mean,
Okay.
although it's interesting, I have a very brilliant student. The last student in my teaching career
Yeah.
was Brazilian, and so she did some work showing that actually Brazil is very much like the West, the Northwestern European culture in some ways, and in some cases really closer to East Asia. So
Is it?
yeah,
That's interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's cool. And presenting ourselves, we are from Numera. Numera is a Brazilian company focused on people analytics. So much more than just analyzing and digging deep into data. We are so much also interested in like human behavior because it affects a lot how people like react in the companies or in the real world, mainly the companies which are our clients. So cosmetics companies or energy companies and other sectors as well. My name is Daniel, and Julia presented.
I'm Julia.
And we work here as consultants, both for like business cases for serving companies in their business problems, and also as trainers. So we train people and departments who want to develop the people analytics skill
I see.
with let's say analysis literacy and also human behavior and biases and critical reasoning. So I have told you that we have a critical reasoning course here, which is a very like a success for us, and that's why we wanted to talk with you. We think you are the greatest reference in the world in this subject.
Oh, thank you.
You deserve it. So starting our conversation, first of all, Richard, why have you decided to be a researcher, professor, and writer? What?
Well, I was fired from my first job at the age of 16.
Oh,
I was a filling station attendant.
really?
Oh
Yes.
my God.
And I've always been extremely absent-minded. So I would do things like fill up people's tanks, take their money, say goodbye, and the hose would drap along behind their bumper. So with errors like that, I was not kept on. So the truth is, I mean, professors really are absent-minded, and we're not really fit
Yeah.
for these kinds of work, including filling station attendant. And I never liked working for people, really. I mean,
Okay.
it's great. You're on your own when you're a professor.
Okay. And that's interesting because you study a lot about people, and I bet that you interact a lot with people in your research as well.
Yes, right.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. I love the research process. I mean, I
That's
love
cool.
working with young students. And
Okay, and the next point, you have already touched on it. It's about your research. We have seen that you talk a lot about human inference or the human reasoning process, as explained in your books. For instance, human inference, strategies and shortcomings of social judgment, induction, process of inference learning and discovery, and the book Rules for Reasoning. What does fascinate you in this field?
well, in graduate school, my very first experiment,
Yeah.
I asked people to take a series of electric shocks, taking as much as they could bear. I gave them a pill, a placebo pill. And I said, this is going to arouse you. Controlled subjects did not get that instruction. And I anticipated that if I told people they had a pill which would arouse them, they wouldn't be as disturbed by the arousal, which in fact was being created by the electric shock.
Oh,
And in fact, that worked out. People who thought that they had taken a pill causing arousal took much more electric shock, which is, but at that time, it was understood by psychologists that any thinking process that people went through, they could tell you about. Said, well, I thought this and then I thought that. So I wanted to get my subjects' comments on what was going through their heads. And it was shocking. I never got the answer. The answer being, well, I started getting the shocks, and then I started getting more and more worked up about it, more and more upset. And then I remember I took this pill, and that's probably why I was so aroused. No one ever said anything remotely like that. They would say things like, I used to build radios, and I got electric shocks, so I guess, that's why I found it easy to take a lot of shock. When I started, and that was studying people's attribution processes, the kinds of causal attributions that people make. And I got interested in studying how people make all kinds of causal attributions, how they understand their own behavior and other people's behavior. But it was always in the back of my mind that people don't know what's going on in their heads. I mean, a little bit. I mean, my imagery is like, you're in a totally dark room, and there's a flashlight in it, which you can spin in one plane, and you say, what's in there? What's in your head? What's in that room? And they report everything in that narrow channel, and they think they've seen it all. And in fact, the first work I did that had impact on the field of psychology in general was showing that people don't know what goes on in their heads. I mean, it's so easy to present them with stimuli that have a particular effect. You know it had an effect. You know why it had an effect. You ask people, did it have an effect? No, that had no effect. Or sometimes, we present them with a stimulus, and it has no effect. And we say, tell me, did that stimulus have any effect? Oh, yes, it had a big effect on mine. So it's actually quite interesting being the person who did that, because people, of course, are always asking, why did you do this?
Yeah.
And I feel very foolish starting to say, well, I mean, you can ask me, but why not ask Joe why I did it? It's just, we have the same theories about human behavior. Turns out people have pretty much the same theories. It's just those theories bear little relation to what actually goes on in their heads.
Yeah.
Yeah. And thinking about the course that is online, the critical thinking for the information age, I think it's quite similar, but it's good to know, why have you decided to launch that course?
Well, after studying attribution and after studying how people think about their reasoning, I started studying errors in reasoning, because it's, perfectly clear. We make errors all the time. So the work that I was most impressed by was by two Israeli psychologists named Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman.
Amazing.
Yeah. And eventually, as you know, Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for economics.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Perfect.
Right. So, but it was beautiful psychological work, and now economics has they call a lot of what they do behavioral economics. And my joke is, if that's social psychology with a name change for business reasons. So, but at any rate, I started studying errors that people make about the simplest kinds of inference, and I got somehow started on looking at how readily we make strong inferences, confident inferences from pathetically small amounts of evidence. I mean, and so I started showing this. I mean, saying, look, I told them this, they inferred that. Or I actually did the study where I would give them an anecdote about something, and then I would present them with data that was contradictory to the implications of that anecdote. And now later I ask them, what's going on, tell me, and they go for the anecdote and throw away the data. So why is that? I mean, why are we so captivated by small amounts of evidence?
Yeah.
And I ended up, people are not thinking statistically. I mean, that's not a natural way for us to think. It's not natural for us to understand how much evidence you need in order to make what kinds of conclusions. There were no tools, actually, for thinking about those kinds of things until the 17th century, when the law of large numbers was invented by an Italian named Bernoulli. And it's a very precise mathematical formula. If you know what a number of values are, data points, and you have an estimate of the error around those data points, you can be very confident about you can be confident about the degree of uncertainty you should have in your inference. So now at that time, I'd been studying people's errors in reasoning, and those of us who studied errors in reasoning used to have a good time laughing about how stupid we are. And I said, it's not just that we're stupid. You can't make us any smarter. Reasoning statistically, reasoning with cost-benefit analysis, and so on. This is just, it's not part of the wiring, and you can do nothing about it. So I started a program of research to show that You can't teach people the law of large numbers. You can't teach them the principle of regression, etc., in such a way that it will make contact with everyday life events. And that turned out to be spectacularly wrong. I mean, I couldn't believe how little instruction it took to make people capable of using the law of large numbers in an extremely correct way, or the regression principle, or to understand even just the simple concept of standard deviation.
Yeah.
You can't really understand a lot of things in the world unless you have a pretty good concept of what the standard deviation of the dimension that you're looking at, what that is.
Yeah. While you were talking, I was thinking about the book Thinking Fast and Slow, and they do talk about how we are bad at statistics. They bring some examples about people who are very mastering statistics. They think they are, but in fact they are not. But the point is, and the point of talking about critical thinking as well, why we talk about this subject and why we have courses to talk about it, it's because in fact you can teach people to think in a certain way. That's what you found out, right?
Right.
Talking about data, on your course you talk about a lot of statistics. For example, you said the law of large numbers, you said regression to the mean, and so forth. Why is the statistics, applying numbers and metrics, so important in our analysis process?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that last?
Yes, sure. Why is the statistics, applying numbers and metrics, so important in our analysis process?
Well, I think it's because statistics gives us tools for predicting the future. The other major error, statistical error that we make, is to make non-regressive predictions, and that's really actually just as hard a concept to apply in the world as was the law of large numbers. If I have a graduate student who's just done a great job in graduate school, I'm confident, absolutely confident he's going to do just as great a job once he's out in the world. And maybe not. I'm constantly being surprised. And happily, often the other way as well. A student who was fairly competent in graduate school and ends up blossoming in their career after that. That's also a regression point. Things that are up, and the concept there is that extreme events, when observed again, will probably not be so extreme. And that's very hard to keep in mind. If you make an observation, it's extreme, you just assume the future is going to be just as extreme as the observation that you saw. Even when you have a good idea of the mean and the standard deviation of the distribution you're talking about. So let's say it's effectiveness in research of a psychologist after graduate school. I have a very good idea of what the standard deviation is there. I know what the mean is there. I know what I've had enough experience being wrong that I ought to be able to make the regressive adjustment. And I can't. That's extraordinarily difficult. But I am, well, so I'll go ahead with your questions.
Okay. Richard, nowadays there are many information sources and databases, and when you are swimming in this information ocean, how do you select which data is useful for your decision making?
I had very poor reception while you were talking.
Oh, okay. Wait. Let me put here again.
No, I think it's something about the system, because you were visually
Oh,
changing as well.
okay. So, like, nowadays we have many information sources and we have databases for everything. So we have two questions for you. First, how do you select which data is useful for your decision making? And second, what reasoning process you recommend whilst we undertake an analysis using these information sources and databases?
Right. Well, the principle that I find most useful, it comes naturally to us, I think, if once you get the concept, is find out what the base rate is for something. That is, what is the mean or what is the median of some distribution? What are the probabilities for that? And you need a fair number of cases to have a good estimate of that. Mm-hmm. And you also need some expertise in interpreting it. And for whatever reason, I'm Mr. Trust the Expert. Because, you know, I'm expert in a few things, not many. Gardening, technology, a little bit about statistics, although I'm no formal mathematician at all. So, but by golly, I'm expert in those things. And when I talk to other people and I see them making errors, I say, you wouldn't make that error if you know what I know. But everybody's like that. Everybody's got some expertise. My plumber's got expertise. I mean, high school teachers of grammar have expertise. I mean, so this has led me to trust experts, and I trust experts to give me the base rate. I don't ever go to a movie without having it being recommended by somebody else.
Really? Oh.
I'll read a book. I never read a book. Now, I miss a lot of things that way. There's no question. But boy, do I save time. I don't do many terrible movies. People will often say, by the way, oh, well, you know, but you're not your friends. They liked it. Why would you assume you'll like it? And the answer is because there is a substantial correlation between my preferences and the preferences of human beings in general, but especially of my friends. I mean, so.
Yeah.
And especially of critics. I mean, although I get mad at critics. So.
Yeah.
But.
Okay, perfect. And right now, like transferring a little bit this discussion to the business world, do you think, I don't know nowadays what is your relation with like companies, private companies? Do you think that executives or business analysts or consultants, they apply critical thinking in a smart way?
You know, I actually don't feel like I have a right to an opinion on that question. I mean, because I'm Mr. Trust the Expert, I'm reluctant to say anything about that because I'm so inexpert on business methods and business procedures. So I can give you a couple of anecdotes that I actually spoke to a group, which I think is very much like you, the consultants. You'll know who they are. What is the Motley Fool? You know that company?
No.
It's a consulting company. They consult the business, and they're an investment company.
Okay.
And I went and basically just had a graduate seminar with them, and I was bowled over by how smart they were and how effective they were in thinking about things that I understand very well. And a lot of people don't understand it, and these people really did. I know this is a highly successful consulting company, so I have no idea how typical it is. I also did a seminar with another investment company, and before I went to speak to them, I asked them, "Tell me how you make your decisions. I'd like to know," because I'm saying, you know, I probably can help you with that. So they told me in detail what their decision-making process was, and I was bowled over. I mean, first of all, they're trying to decide to invest in a particular stock, they have two people in the company independently make their assessment. They can't talk to each other. They can't talk to anybody. They make their independent, and often they converge. Sometimes they don't. But in any case, it's then opened up to it's a very small company, maybe 12 or 15 people in the company. It's opened up to everybody, and they present their cases. This is what I think is going on with this company. This is where I think it's going to go. And so they bring in expertise and points of view that are broader than their own. So it's a great case of large numbers. And it's and they understand the statistical concept of independence, how important it is. I mean, if you want to get two judgments for people, you want to maximize them, you don't let them influence one another at all. And once they've come to a decision, you see what they think. And people have no idea, by the way, of how little convergence there can be. I've been on grant committees for the government, and the correlation between any two psychologists' judgments about the range of quality of the grant proposal that they're seeing, the correlation is about 0.3. Now, that's not nothing, but everybody is shocked when they find this out. And by the way, it's not different, significantly different in economics or even in physics, the correlation between any two people. Now, I hasten to say another extremely important statistical concept, which I'm sure I don't apply anything like as much as I should, but for independent judgments, looking at an array of cases like you have in businesses or grant proposals, you're typically dealing with stuff that's well above the middle. I mean, nobody, they're not considering, shall we go with fly-by-night widget company. They're looking at companies that have some basis for assuming that they have some quality, and the same thing for grant proposals. I mean, you don't end up looking at terrible grant proposals, but people feel confident about their own judgment, and we, to a much greater extent than we have any right to, given how well we correlate with other people whose judgment we respect as much as our own, or sometimes even more. So there's less agreement in the world than we realize. Partly we're protected from it. I mean, there's a very, apropos of cultural differences, one of the most striking cultural differences that I've observed is for East Asians, especially Japanese, who are extreme on this. And at the other end are Americans, and I'll bet Brazilians as well on the other. And that's the dimension of trading opinions. I mean, one Japanese would never ask another, what did you think of that movie? Because, I liked it, but what if he didn't like it? And then where would we be? That's the wheels of social interaction in America.
Yeah.
But it's true in Brazil as well.
Yeah. We discuss a lot about each other's opinions.
Right. So, but it is a marked cultural difference.
Yeah, that's true. And talking about the structuring the reasoning, we talked about how people do not do it. Why do you think that happens? Why do you think that people do not structure their reasoning?
Well, I think it's primarily because they don't have all the tools that are necessary to think effectively about the world that we live in. So that's an advertisement for Mindware.
Yeah.
There are tools in there that people, it's interesting. I'd be interested in your view, actually. One thing that always struck me about statistics, applying statistics to everyday life events, is how once you do it, it feels, it feels right. I mean, it's not for those problems where we do apply it. We have some confidence that we've used the right tools. Anyway, so that's one thing that's always struck me about teaching statistics. It's really intuitive. I mean, you don't have to convince people of the truth of the law of large numbers. Say, guess what? No evidence is better. Yeah, I knew that. Okay, go a little further. How much evidence is needed for what kind of problem? Same thing for regression, although it's a little less intuitive for regression.
Yeah. Here we usually say that for starting to think critically, we have to start studying things. So these are some things that we have to start studying, like statistics, and some things that we usually think intuitively wrong. And once we know it's wrong, we can think about it right. And also bringing it to the more accurate and rational side of the brain, the thought, which is what Kahneman always talks about. So, yes.
By the way, Kahneman is not nearly as optimistic as I am about teaching people statistics.
Yeah.
But actually, you can't trust either of us, because I'm the most optimistic person I know, and he's the most pessimistic person I know. So,
he doesn't believe it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And Richard, like in the beginning of our talk, you have discussed that it's not natural for us humans to think in a rational way using the facts, the reality. And why do you think that this happens? Why, for example, we are so moved by emotions and feelings and not that much about facts and the real life?
Actually, of all the questions that you prime me with, I have less. I don't know. I don't know. But I will say this about that, which my research is about human error and how to improve it. So I'm constantly looking at the judgments that people around me make and the judgments that are made by people in the media and by politicians and so on. And I think that the errors that people make are much more likely to be cognitive errors than to be emotional errors. And I actually think this is a good principle to use, especially when you think that someone has done something evil. And to assume we're so primed that somebody does something bad, then they've got the attribute that makes them do the bad thing. And no, maybe they didn't have the right data, maybe they didn't have the right tool to think about it. Once you get as convinced as I am of the fallibility of human reasoning, it seems sort of unnecessary to drag in emotional states or motivational states to explain it.
Okay. Okay. And like going back to our thinking process, in general, we discuss, and we know this theoretically, that there is the inductive, the deductive, and the abductive thinking. However, we don't make this distinction in real life. Why we don't make this distinction regarding our thinking processes?
I don't know. This is of the questions you primed me with. This was the one that caused me to think the most. Because it's not a hard concept. I mean, induction, you give us some cases and we go to a generalization, or deduction, you give us a premise and we go to another conclusion. The difference between inductive and deductive reasoning. I'm not sure that we need to understand formally what those things are, as long as we know that as long as we know what tools we should use when generalizing something. That you should know that how many cases there are. We should have some idea about the standard deviation, the variance on the dimension. We should have some idea of how extreme our observations might be. And if you know that, you don't have to know. Guess what? You were doing inductive reasoning there. It's like in the Moliere play of the bourgeois gentleman who's told by somebody who's trying to make him fit better into society, be more like a highly effective person, and tells him, well, there's poetry and there's prose. You speak. We've been speaking prose. He says, really? I've been speaking prose all my life. You've been using the law of large numbers all your life.
That's true.
So.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think the last question, do you have any other, Daniel?
No, I don't have right now. I just would like to comment. We discussed a lot about this thinking process in real life, because at least for me, I don't know for Julia, but I have passed by 4 companies right now with very, very smart people. However, whenever we are discussing a business issue, a real case, in general, it does not come to the discussion. What is the median? What is the standard deviation? What are the extreme values? The basic screening of the case, And that's why we were so thrilled about asking this to you, because in real life, I haven't seen this. And as we're saying, also in your research with real people, outside of the companies, this is not natural as well. And I was curious about this.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I don't know if these people at the consulting company that I was talking to, I don't know if how well they could articulate the principles of analysis that they were using. I really don't have a clear idea. I mean, maybe they could know exactly what they're doing, exactly what I found to be effective and what they were doing. They know what they're doing, they know why they're doing it, they know the errors that could be made by people who didn't know what they know. On the other hand, I'll bet a lot of it is not conscious. When I first did this work showing that people don't know what the heck goes on in their heads, they don't know why they do what they do. Of course, it was very counterintuitive, and there was a lot of conflict about it. And actually, a Nobel Prize winner named Herbert Simon, prize winner in sort of economics, psychology, political science, was offended by it because he would ask people how they solved a problem, and he was confident that the people were tapping into what literally went on in their heads and reporting it to him. And there's not a lot that's like that in the world. I mean, what they're doing, they've solved the problem. They know what problem-solving tools they ought to have used, and they tell you what those tools are. But anybody else who knew those tools and who observed the person solve the problem would have given you the same answer. It's not based on privilege. We don't have privilege access to what's going on with us. But anyway, this very guy, although he was upset that I'm saying, this is not a very good tool to use, gave me a perfect example. He's a chess player. And he said, when people first play chess, you ask them what strategy they're using. It's a strategy. I'm not using. I'm just making them. Says it's wrong. They are using a strategy. It's called Duffer strategy. Everybody plays the same way at first, and then if they stick with it, they get more and more expert about it. They can get very articulate, reading about it, and they're watching games and something, thinking about it all the time. They can be very articulate about what the reason, and they're correct when they tell you, why did you make that move? They know why they made it, because I was trying to avoid losing my knight 2 steps ahead. So, but then he says, if they really stick with it beyond that and become like a world expert, they no longer can tell you what the hell they're doing. They'll say, I'm using this strategy. They're not using that strategy. He knows they're not using that strategy. It's just all of that stuff that was articulate at one point has become unconscious, which is not a problem, by the way.
Yeah.
So.
You can go on, Julia.
For the last one?
Yeah.
Okay. So Richard, how can we improve and develop critical thinking? Do you have any recommendations of books, courses, videos? What do you have for the people who are watching?
Well, the easiest way, the cheapest way is to see my course.
Perfect.
We're really focusing on that.
Yeah.
Or they want to do a little more, they can read the book, also called Mindware. There isn't an awful lot else out there, honestly, of telling people how to think. Other than that, it's technique. How do you become expert in what you're doing? What tools to use? So it's just and there's spillover, by the way, from that. One person has done a lovely study giving people problems to think about and see what their solutions are. It's given to doctors, to scientists, to lawyers, to journalists, and so on. And the person who did this work, I don't know if he invented the term, but what he was studying was deformation professionnelle, is the French term for it. That is, you begin to think like a journalist. You apply that to all kinds of things, and usually it's useful. Or you begin to think like a lawyer, and deductive reasoning becomes a large part of your approach. So, a college education is substantially about giving people tools which may generalize well beyond the subject matter where the principles are taught.
Very good.
And I have one question about this. Do you think that, like, critical thinking content, for example, basic statistics, law of large numbers, regression to the mean, can this be taught in high school, for example, or elementary school?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question. Oh my God. In the U.S., kids can't get out of high school if they can't do algebra. That's when they quit high school at 16. They can't do algebra. Well, I couldn't do algebra either. I copied the homework of my best friend. I did pretty well in algebra. But I mean, but algebra is, to me, it's hard. Statistics is so natural. Like I said, I mean, law of large numbers, hello. I mean, that's easy. Now let's expand that. I mean, and it's infinitely more. How many people are ever going to use algebra in the course of their life?
That's true.
I mean, maybe 2%. And we make it a roadblock from high school. Whereas we could be teaching on statistical principles, psychological principles, economic principles, which would be vastly more useful to people.
Sure.
Perfect. So, yeah, this is our last question, Richard. Do you have any more, Julia?
No, would you like to say anything to the Brazilian watchers?
Well, I hope I see you folks sometime.
That's good.
We hope to.
I mean, because I had this, like I said, my last student and one of my very most favorite was a Brazilian woman, and it was fascinating talking to her about Brazil. So I'd like to get some firsthand knowledge of Brazil.
Yeah, you're more than welcome.
Nice. Well, by the way, where are you? Are you living in Ann Arbor right now, or
No,
no?
I'm in Tucson. We live in Ann Arbor in the summer and in Tucson in the winter, but right now we got trapped.
Oh, yeah.
While we're in Tucson, so it's hot, but it's lovely.
That's cool.
Good.
That's cool. Thank you so much for your time, Richard. It
Sure.
was
Thank you.
it was a pleasure.
For me.
Thank you, Richard. Hope to see you again.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.